I never thought my breakup would turn into a nightmare. When I ended things with Mark, I expected some resistance, maybe a few drunk texts, a pathetic late-night voicemail, the usual theatrics of a man who couldn't handle rejection. But I never expected this. At first, it was small things. A message here, a missed call there. I just want to talk. We need closure. I deserve an explanation. As if months of arguments, his controlling nature and his paranoia weren't explanation enough. I ignored him. What else was there to say? But Mark wasn't the type to let go. The calls didn't stop. He used different numbers, restricted lines, anything to make sure I saw his name on my screen. I blocked them all. That's when he started showing up. It began with coincidences. I'd run into him at the grocery store, even though he lived across town. He'd be at the coffee shop near my office, pretending he hadn't seen me, lingering just long enough for me to notice. Then he stopped pretending. One evening I stepped out of work and there he was, leaning against his car. "We need to talk," he said, like it was an appointment I had forgotten to schedule. I told him no. I told him to leave me alone. But he only smiled, as if my resistance was just a part of some game he was playing. It got worse. He messaged my friends, weaving some sob story about how broken he was, how I had blindsided him, how he just needed someone to help him reach me. Some of them fell for it. "Maybe just hear him out," they said. "He sounds like he's really struggling." They didn't understand. Mark wasn't struggling. He was obsessed. One night, I woke up to my phone vibrating, a restricted number. I let it go to voicemail, but it rang again, and again, and again. My stomach tightened. I turned off my phone, but the unease didn't leave. The next morning, when I turned it back on, there were 32 missed calls. My chest felt tight as I listened to the one voicemail he had left, his voice eerily calm. "I'll never leave you alone." That was the moment something in me snapped. Fear turned into rage. Helplessness hardened into determination. If he wanted to play games, fine, but I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. The morning after Mark's message, I sat in my car outside work, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My phone was still in my lap, the screen filled with missed calls from an unknown number. 32 calls in one night. 32 times he had tried to reach me, as if sheer persistence could wear me down. I wanted to believe he would get bored, that this was just the last burst of desperation before he finally let go, but deep down, I knew better. Mark never accepted losing. I tried to move on with my day, pretending I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. But then my coworker Sarah stopped by my desk with a hesitant smile. "Hey, so Mark messaged me last night. He said he's been trying to reach you. He sounded really upset." My stomach clenched. "He just wants to talk, you know? Maybe if you just hear him out, he'll finally leave you alone." She meant well, but she didn't understand. He wasn't some heartbroken ex looking for closure. He was testing the boundaries of how much control he still had over my life. That night, I locked my doors and kept my phone on silent, determined not to give him the reaction he wanted. But ignoring him didn't make him go away. Instead, it made him escalate. The next morning, there were more missed calls, more voicemails, his voice switching between pleading and angry, like he couldn't decide whether to guilt me into responding or punish me for ignoring him. Then the messages started. Not to me, but to my friends, my coworkers, even my mother. "Just checking in, hope you're doing okay. I haven't heard from her, and I'm worried. She's not answering my calls. Can you let her know I just want to talk? Did she tell you what happened? She won't even give me a chance to explain. It's not fair." Each message was carefully worded, designed to make him look like the reasonable one, the one who was just trying to make peace while I was being cruel and irrational. And it worked. My mother called, concerned. "Maybe if you just hear him out, he'll stop." My friend Lauren texted, saying he seemed really hurt. "It's not like he's threatening you, right?" That was the problem. He never crossed the obvious lines. He never said anything that could be reported as a threat. He never showed up at my door banging and screaming. Instead, he lurked just out of reach, his presence always there, lingering, pressing, reminding me that I wasn't free of him. And then he started showing up. First, it was the grocery store near my apartment, a place he never shopped before. I turned a corner and there he was, standing by the produce section, acting surprised to see me. "Wow, what are the chances?" he said, smiling. I didn't respond. I walked past him, heart pounding, pretending I didn't see him. A few days later, he was at the coffee shop near my office. Again, the same fake surprise, the same smile. Then, I stepped out of work one evening and saw him leaning against his car across the street, watching the entrance. He didn't say anything, didn't call out to me, just stood there, arms crossed as if waiting. A cold wave of fear spread through me. He wanted me to know he was there, that he could be anywhere. I went to the police. I sat in a cramped office, hands shaking, explaining everything, his calls, his messages, the way he was following me. The officer across from me nodded, took notes, and then sighed. Look, I get that this is scary, but he hasn't made any direct threats. He hasn't hurt you. If he shows up at your home, call us. Otherwise, there's not much we can do. I left the station feeling even more helpless than before. The law was on his side because he knew exactly how far he could push without crossing the line. He was playing a game and I was the one trapped in it. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at my phone, waiting for it to light up with another call. My heart pounded with every small noise outside. I couldn't live like this. I wouldn't. Mark thought he had me cornered, that I had no choice but to endure his constant presence. But he was wrong. I did have a choice. If the law wouldn't stop him, I would. I spent the next few days trapped in a cycle of exhaustion and paranoia. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. Every time I stepped outside, I scanned my surroundings, searching for any sign of him. My heart pounded when I walked to my car, my keys clenched so tightly in my hand that the metal bit into my palm. I barely slept, jolting awake at the smallest noise, convinced I'd see his shadow outside my window. Mark had made sure I felt his presence even when he wasn't there. He had turned my own life into a prison, and the worst part was, no one seemed to take it seriously. I had tried everything. I had blocked his number, ignored his messages, changed my routines, gone to the police. Nothing worked. He always found a way back in. And now he wasn't just calling me. He was reaching out to people in my life, weaving his version of events, making himself seem like the victim. My mother had called me, her voice thick with concern. I know he hurt you, honey, but maybe you should just talk to him. He's obviously struggling. My friend Lauren had texted, Are you sure you're not being too harsh? He really seems like he just wants closure. They didn't understand. They didn't see the manipulation, the way he was turning the narrative against me. Every message, every plea for sympathy was just another way to tighten his grip. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I was done being scared. I was done waiting for help that would never come. If Mark wanted to play games, I would play too. But I wasn't going to defend myself anymore. I was going to strike back. I started by thinking about Mark's weaknesses. He lived by his phone. When we were together, he couldn't go 5 minutes without checking his notifications. He was addicted to the feeling of control, to knowing exactly who was trying to reach him and why. So what would happen if his phone, his precious connection to the world, became a source of complete and utter chaos? The idea started small. I spent an hour one night filling out online forms with his number. Insurance quotes, car dealership inquiries, personal loan applications, anything that promised follow-up calls. I knew these companies were relentless. They wouldn't stop at 1 or 2 attempts. They would call him every hour, day and night, desperate to close a sale. I pictured him waking up to dozens of missed calls, his phone vibrating nonstop, his irritation growing with every ring. It was a satisfying thought, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I turned to Craigslist next. I knew from experience how quickly a phone number posted in the wrong place could spiral out of control. I created several ads under different categories. Massive moving sale. Everything must go. Call for details. Experienced handyman available. Affordable rates. Same-day service. Purebred puppies for sale. Text only. I carefully crafted each one to attract the most responses possible. Within minutes of posting, I saw people already inquiring, asking for photos, requesting details. His phone wouldn't just be ringing, it would be flooded. But I wasn't done. I searched for online sweepstakes and giveaways, those too good to be true promotions for free vacations, cash prizes, luxury car raffles, anything that required a phone number, I used his. I signed him up for newsletters, spam emails, political surveys. The final touch? A fake job listing, now hiring, high-paying position, flexible hours, no experience needed. Call now. I knew the desperation in people's voices when they were looking for work. His phone was about to become a nightmare. When I was finished, I sat back and let out a slow breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. I had done something. I had taken control. Mark wanted to invade my life? Fine. Now he would know what it felt like to be constantly pursued, constantly watched, constantly bombarded. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. No late-night calls, no anxiety twisting in my gut. When I woke up, I felt lighter, almost normal. I checked my messages, half expecting to see some desperate attempt from him to reach me. But there was nothing, just silence. It was peaceful. Then, around noon, my phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "Cute. You think this is over?" I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. He knew. Maybe he didn't have proof, but he knew. And if I had learned anything about Mark, it was that he never let go without a fight. I had hit him where it hurt, but this wasn't over. Not yet. Mark had always been in control. He was the one who dictated the rules, who decided when a conversation started and when it ended. He was the one who got to linger in my life, showing up when he pleased, pressing just enough to remind me that I would never truly be free of him. But now, for the first time, the balance had shifted. Now, he was the one being chased. I imagined his morning unfolding, blissfully unaware of what was about to hit him. Maybe he woke up feeling smug, thinking I was still avoiding him, still cowering under the weight of his presence in my life. He probably went about his usual routine, checking his notifications, scrolling through his messages, expecting to see the usual flow of texts from friends, social media alerts, maybe even another misguided attempt from one of my friends or family members urging me to just hear him out. But instead, his phone was flooded with something else entirely. First, the insurance companies, then the loan offers, then the car dealerships. A relentless wave of calls, each more persistent than the last, the kind that didn't stop at one or two tries, the kind that followed up again and again, desperate to close a deal, to convince him that he needed what they were selling. By the time he had his morning coffee, his voicemail was probably already full. Then came the text messages. At first, maybe he thought it was a mistake. "Hey, is the fridge still available? I can come by today for the couch. Can you send more pictures of the puppies?" I imagined him frowning in confusion, wondering if his number had been accidentally posted somewhere. Maybe he even responded to one or two, telling them they had the wrong person. But then the messages kept coming and coming and coming. The realization must have hit slowly, creeping in like a chill down his spine. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this to him. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure his phone wouldn't stop ringing, that his messages wouldn't stop flooding in. And if I knew Mark, I knew exactly what his next thought was: me. By midday, I got my first sign that my plan had worked. A text from an unknown number, short, clipped, filled with barely contained rage. "Cute, you think this is over?" I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. He was angry. Good. I had hit a nerve. But I didn't respond. I let him stew in his frustration, let him waste his energy trying to figure out what to do next. He wanted me to react. He wanted confirmation that I was behind this, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of calm. I went to work, actually able to focus for the first time in weeks. My lunch break wasn't spent nervously checking my phone, bracing for another unwanted message or call. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of my life. That night, I slept soundly, sinking into my mattress like a weight had been lifted off my chest. No waking up in a panic, no lying in bed, heart racing, wondering if he was lurking outside. When I opened my eyes the next morning, there was no immediate rush of dread. Just quiet. Just peace. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting another spam call, another desperate attempt from some poor stranger responding to a fake Craigslist ad. But it wasn't that. It was a text from Lauren. "Hey, is everything okay with Mark? He posted some weird stuff on Facebook." My stomach tightened. I pulled up the app, my fingers moving quickly, my heart beating a little faster than I wanted to admit. I searched his name. His profile was still public. Of course it was. Mark had always loved the attention too much to lock it down. And there it was, a long, rambling post. the kind filled with self-pity, vague accusations, a desperate attempt to get people on his side. Some people just can't let go. Some people are so vindictive that they'll do anything to ruin your life. You think you know someone, but then they turn into a crazy stalker. If anyone's been getting weird messages from my number, just know it's not me. It's someone trying to destroy my reputation. I won't name names, but you all know who I'm talking about. I smirked. Oh, Mark, even now he was trying to play the victim, trying to flip the script. He wanted sympathy. He wanted people to rally behind him, to paint me as the villain. I scrolled through the comments, curious. Some people were, of course, eating it up. Dude, that's messed up. Who would even do that? People are insane. But others weren't so sure. Are you sure it's not karma? Maybe they just got tired of your bullshit, man. You do have a lot of exes, just saying. That one made me laugh. Maybe, just maybe, the cracks were starting to show. But I wasn't stupid. Mark wasn't the type to take a hit and walk away. He was the type to retaliate, to find new ways to get under my skin. I had thrown the first real punch in this game, and now I had to be ready for whatever came next. Because Mark wasn't done. Not yet. The moment I saw Mark's Facebook post, I knew he wouldn't stop. He wasn't the type to take a loss quietly. He needed to regain control, to turn himself into the victim, to make sure everyone saw him as the wounded party and me as the unstable, vengeful ex. I could already predict his next move. If he couldn't shake me through harassment, he would try to isolate me, turning people against me one by one. It was classic Mark. Manipulation had always been his greatest weapon. But this time, I was ready. I didn't react publicly. That was what he wanted. For me to comment, to deny, to get sucked into his little game where he could twist my words and play the reasonable one while I looked hysterical. Instead, I sat back and watched. His post gained traction with more people chiming in, some defending him, others calling him out. His frustration must have been growing because within hours, I got a text from a mutual friend, Amy. Hey, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but Mark told me you've been messing with him. He says you put his number online. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Of course he was trying to turn people against me. I typed back, keeping it simple. Did he tell you why I might have done that? A few minutes passed before she responded. He said, you're just mad about the breakup. I shook my head. Mark was nothing if not predictable. He called me 32 times in one night. He showed up outside my job. He messaged my friends and my mom pretending to be concerned. I went to the police and they said they couldn't do anything because he hadn't technically threatened me. He's been trying to control me even after I left. So yeah, I made sure his phone rang as much as mine did. He can play the victim all he wants, but I know the truth. And deep down, I think you do too. Amy didn't respond right away. Hours passed before I got another message. I had no idea. He made it sound like you just snapped out of nowhere. I smiled to myself. Mark's grip was slipping. But I wasn't done. I had been playing defense for too long, waiting for him to leave me alone, trying to fight off his manipulation piece by piece. That wasn't enough. If I wanted him to finally back off, I needed to hit him where it hurt most. And I knew exactly how to do it. Mark had a fragile ego. He cared deeply about how people saw him, about maintaining the image of the charming, put-together guy who always had everything under control. The idea that people might see him as desperate, unstable, or pathetic was his worst nightmare. He could handle confrontation, he could handle conflict, but what he couldn't handle was being humiliated. So I gave him exactly that. I went through my old messages, my call logs, the screenshots I had saved, every desperate voicemail, every manipulative text, every attempt to turn my friends against me. I compiled everything into a neat, damning package and sent it to his boss. Mark worked in sales, a job that required charm, confidence, and a spotless reputation. His company had strict policies about harassment and workplace behavior, and though I had never worked there, I knew enough to understand that any hint of scandal could put his job in jeopardy. I didn't have to say much, just a short, polite email explaining that I had been dealing with persistent harassment from an employee of theirs, attaching the proof, and mentioning that I had already attempted to involve the police but was told there was little they could do. Then I pressed send. I imagined his reaction when he got the call from HR. The way his stomach must have dropped when he realized that his private actions were now under scrutiny, that the power he thought he had over me had been ripped away. His job was everything to him. His carefully curated image was everything to him. And now, it was slipping. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the end of the week, his Facebook post was gone. He stopped messaging our mutual friends. The texts, the calls, the sudden appearances outside my office, all of it just stopped. Then, one final message. You win. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the words settle in. There was no apology, no admission of guilt, just two words, bitter and resentful, but laced with something else. Defeat. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because for the first time in a long time, I was free. A week passed, then another. The silence felt strange at first, almost unnatural. For so long, my life had revolved around Mark's presence, his calls, his messages, his relentless need to keep me tethered to him. Now, there was nothing. No unknown numbers lighting up my screen, no sudden, unexpected encounters, no lingering sense of being watched. It was over. At first, I didn't believe it. I still checked my phone constantly, half expecting to see his name pop up. I still found myself scanning the street when I walked to my car, looking for that familiar shape, that familiar smirk. But as the days stretched into weeks and the silence remained unbroken, I started to accept that this time, it was real. Whatever had happened after that HR call, whatever damage my email had done, it had been enough to make him back off for good. Maybe he realized that if he pushed any further, I would push back even harder. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he had finally met a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. His last message stayed in my phone for days before I finally deleted it. You win. Two simple words, bitter and resentful, but laced with something else. Defeat. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't admitted guilt. Mark would never be the kind of person who could acknowledge his own wrongdoing, but the fact that he had sent that message at all meant that he understood, deep down, that he had lost. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The tension in my shoulders eased, the constant weight in my chest began to lift. My sleep returned to normal. I stopped flinching every time my phone rang. I started to remember what it was like to exist without constantly being on edge, without always anticipating the next attack, the next manipulation. I had spent so much time reacting to Mark, shaping my life around his actions, his obsessions, his need for control. Now I was free to shape it for myself again. At work, I could focus without that gnawing anxiety pulling me out of the moment. I stayed late one evening, finishing a project, and when I finally left the office, I didn't feel the usual spike of fear as I stepped outside. No one was waiting for me, no one was watching. I walked to my car without glancing over my shoulder, without gripping my keys so tightly that they left indentations in my palm. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a victory. I started going out again, meeting up with friends without worrying that he might show up. I took back the spaces he had invaded, the coffee shop near my office, the grocery store he had suddenly started frequenting. Each time I felt stronger. Each time I reminded myself that this was my life, my world, and I refused to let him take any more of it from me. One afternoon, I met Lauren at a cafe we used to go to all the time, back before Mark had made everything feel small and suffocating. We sat outside, sipping coffee in the late autumn sun, the crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and roasted espresso. It had been a long time since I'd felt light enough to enjoy a moment like this, the simple pleasure of conversation without the weight of fear pressing down on me. So, I guess he finally got the message, Lauren said, stirring her drink. I guess so, I said, watching the steam curl from my cup. She studied me for a moment, a knowing smile playing at her lips. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you. I raised an eyebrow. What, standing up for myself? No, she said with a laugh, completely ruining a man's life. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. I didn't ruin his life, I just gave him a taste of what he put me through. Lauren tilted her head. And how does it feel? I thought about it for a moment, really letting the question settle. The truth was, it wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about making him suffer the way he had made me suffer. It was about reclaiming something I had lost. My sense of safety, my control, the power he had spent so long trying to take from me. And as I sat there, warm coffee in my hands, the sun on my face, my laughter coming easily again, I realized something. It felt damn good, and more than that, it felt like freedom.